One of the easiest ways to take better water photos is to make sure that you have a clean port with no water spots on it. If you like shooting with a curved or dome port, I'm here to tell you that spitters are not quitters. But first, we're gonna start with a flat port because that's what I use the most. Why are flat ports better than dome ports? Essentially because you're not shooting through a layer of water, which ends up making your photos a lot more tack sharp and, in my opinion, more professional. I've seen a lot of videos online that says candle wax is the best option for not getting water drops. One, who has random candlesticks around the house? And two, why use candle wax when you can use surf wax? To have the most success, we're actually gonna start the day or the night before your shoot. It begins with cleaning your housing. You're gonna make sure that there's no sand on your port on the outside or the inside. It tends to get pretty dirty and like dog hair, cat hair, stuff like that also likes to stick in there. I suggest also checking for any sand in the edges and making sure that your camera is properly lubricated for your shoot. My favorite method for not getting water spots is essentially a combo of face oil and surf wax, which is kind of weird, but you always have those two things on you when you're shooting in a tropical surf environment. I like putting on the first layer the night before, and essentially the oil near your nose or in and around your ears is usually good because those are the most oily spots on your face. And you're just gonna buff it in. What I do is I just take a finger, buff it in as much as possible. You don't want there to be like a thick residue layer from this. And honestly, just face oil alone will work, but what I found is a combo of surf wax and face oil tends to work the best. From there, we're gonna put on the surf wax. I haven't found a brand that actually works better than one or another. Just kind of dab it all around, and then you're gonna buff that in really, really well. Pro tip here for when you're gonna be shooting in the water is you can see in my housing how I have this layer of wax on the top here. You're gonna take a bar of wax and you're just gonna build it up. So then that way, when you're in the water, you're always gonna have some that you can get back to. You don't wanna use a sandy wax bar. I've done that and then I end up picking out the sand pieces. And once you're in the water, essentially use a finger, just dab it in like this, and then you'll just buff it in. And that's all you need. You don't need that much. I promise you, you don't want to overdo it because then you'll end up having this haze on your photos. Okay, it's shoot day now. You want to apply one more layer of face oil and surf wax to the port. With a dry port method, when you dip it and bring the port up, you want to make sure that you bring it up really slow to make sure you get the cleanest port possible. If you pull the camera up and there's a few water drops left, what you could actually do is just blow them off. Because of the waxy surface, the water beads up really easily and just slides right off. Just be careful not to spit too much when you're blowing on it. If you use a really thick zinc, like I do with Vertra, you want to put it on your face and then you'll rub it in with one hand. Keep one hand really clean for in the water, and then what I do is I keep my right hand for buffing my ports in really clean. Some people say that just going up and down in streaks works better, so then that the way the water drops only go down. I have not noticed a huge difference in this. I think that buffing works plenty good. It is normal for this to wear off after maybe 30 minutes to 2 hours, so that's why you really want this wax on the top to rebuff in. Sometimes it's hard to get to the face oils after you've been in the water for a really long time, so that's why I use that combo of kind of starting with face oil, especially before getting in the water, and then wax once I'm actually in the water. Something that can be hard is keeping the port dry in between sets, but I try to keep my housing up with a water level kind of like this, ready to shoot. This works especially good when there's a channel. If you're shooting shore break or a beach break, or you're just caught inside, oftentimes there's gonna be bubbles from the big waves that are ripping through. What I like to do is I actually like to push bubbles out of the side, and then I bring the port up through a clean little hole in the water. This tends to work, but it is really difficult. And honestly, if you're gonna be shooting in a lot of those situations, then most likely a dome port might be a better option to use. Okay, so what if you notice your photos being hazy and this method's really not working out? If you're in the water, you can use your board shorts, wetsuit, and really buff in the port and make it as clean as possible. This way you'll kind of restart and then just kind of rebuff again. Honestly, the first time or a few times that I did this method, I used way too much wax, and then I ended up having haze on my camera. It really sucks, but once you get the hang of this method, I promise you this is the best, especially for video, because you want to have the absolute cleanest, sharpest image for all those videos coming through. You don't want water spots on your port, which it happens sometimes. Two last little tricks that can improve your image quality are making sure that your lens is as close to the end of your port element as possible. If it's pulled back, then it's going to magnify the water spots that are on the lens. The last trick is using a wide open aperture like an f2.8 versus an f8. Essentially, that's going to make your area of focus go from wider to a little bit more compressed, and then that kind of tends to blur out the water spots a lot more. This is Leo, he's your new host. This is how he doesn't get water drops. Okay, whether you're using a dome port, a fisheye port, or a GoPro dome port, it all starts the same, hours before your shoot. Typically I do this the day or the night before a shoot. For some reason, the dome ports seem to attract a lot more dog hair, dust, sand, etc. And there's a lot more crevices on the edge where it can get stuck. If Leo wasn't so hairy, I probably wouldn't have so much freaking hair in all my ports. Thanks for the kisses, buddy. You're so cute. For half this video, he's been sitting at my feet. I actually start by spitting on the dome. The day before and night before, it's essentially just important to get the thickest coat possible of saliva, and I just call it like the base coat. One weird little trick is to actually drink Red Bull or Gatorade and then spit on the dome. I think it's because the sugar in the saliva makes it stick to the dome port a lot better. Something I've seen other people do is actually pour a Red Bull or a Gatorade onto the dome and then spit on it and kind of mix it in that way. I feel like that's kind of a waste. I guess I would just rather lick my dome. Once I'm done spitting on my ports, essentially I just let them stay out for the night and dry. It's time for your shoot and you're just gonna keep spitting on your dome. The last thing you do before your shoot is to actually lick your dome. That's because your fingerprints have oils on it and you can actually fingerprint your dome. And especially when you're shooting into the sun, that shows up in your photos. The solution to that is to only use your tongue on the port right before you're going to shoot. Make sure to be aware of your surroundings when you're licking your dome. I was on a boat a few years ago and we hit a wave as I was licking it. It came up, smoked me in the teeth. It hit me super hard and I actually scratched my port with my teeth. Seriously, what's with the licking the dome thing? Do you lick your dome? Licking a dome is kind of a weird thing. This is really awkward. So what are the pros and cons of using a dome port? If you're shooting shore break or you're stuck on the inside where there's a lot of bubbles, the bubbles tend to just wick right off of the port because it is wet, so it just kind of slides right off. You get this beautiful water line where there's less of a distortion between above water and below water. This works actually the opposite of a flat port. You want your lens to be farther away from the end of the port to have the most clean and dramatic water line possible. All right, so the cons are essentially anything over a 50mm lens, I've noticed with a dome port is not sharp. I don't understand why exactly, but through testing a lot of different ports, a lot of different combinations, it just never seems to be sharp above 50mm. If you're gonna use a dome, I would stop at 35 just to be safe. Number two, you are shooting through a layer of water, so typically your photos are not gonna be quite as sharp as when you're in the flat port. And yeah, you're shooting through a layer of kind of like wax and face oil, but it's so much more thin than this like layer of spit and water that you're shooting through. There's definitely a huge difference in sharpness that I've seen. Once your saliva and like water and stuff kind of like dries off, it creates this like webbing of a split of a bunch of water drops all over the port, which is a huge pain in the ass. And essentially it only gives you a 2 to 3 second window for nailing the shot before that happens. And especially for video, that just does not work with me. For some reason, the dome, there tends to be a lot more artifacts from like light hitting it weirdly. So if you have scratches, it's amplified. Light is coming in at an angle, then you're gonna get all of these like sunspots, glares, stuff like that. One thing is that they do scratch a lot easier, and you would need to make sure that like when you're spitting on it and like rubbing it in, you're not rubbing sand in. That is super crucial. The last thing to go over is action cams and unique situations, because I've been in a lot of weird ones throughout my career. With the GoPro, I still think the best method to go about is licking. I know this goes against my flat port method, but after a lot of testing, licking the GoPro is still the best method. One thing that I have found though is that Polar Pro has these ND filters, and whatever coating is on these is amazing, and you don't have to lick these, you don't have to do anything, you just have to keep them as clean as possible. 360 cameras are kind of weird because I've never found a method that works better than just keeping the lenses dry. The reason is that they have this grooved edge on them that water likes to just sit on, and so when you have stitching in the camera, that ruins the stitch line, and then you're always going to have issues with water spots. My solution is to just keep your lenses as dry as possible. I actually shot the Insta360 X3 launch, and how I did it was I was in the surf with a blower, and I would blow the spots off of the X3, and then we would just try to keep it as dry as possible. That's how we got clean foiling, surfing, shots like that. Kind of wild, but it was by far the best method. Long story short, 360 cameras are not good for surfing, but they're amazing for so many other things. The last method is pretty funny. It's actually just using a squeegee in the water. I found this out when I was shooting in Iceland because I had these really thick mittens on and I could not use face oil or surf wax, because if I tried to rub the port, I would just take the face oil and the wax off. So what I would suggest doing is having a squeegee and just wiping the port down If you don't like my face oil and surf wax method, then the squeegee method actually works really well no matter what situation that you're in. A lot of people, what they'll actually end up doing is tying a squeegee to their housing and then just letting it dangle when they're shooting. I don't like that because the rope kind of gets tangled in your wrist. So I actually have a smaller squeegee. What you can do with a small squeegee, especially if you have a long sleeve wetsuit, stick it in the sleeve of your wetsuit and then pull it out and then use it on your housing. And lastly, this video is not sponsored by Aquatech, but that is the housing that I use and love, and I have a discount code that all of you guys can use. Hopefully this has been super informative for you. If you have any comments or questions, please just leave them below. Any support on the channel would be greatly appreciated with a like, comment, subscribe, etc. I'd be stoked to continue doing these tutorials, and if you want to see more, just let me know what topics you want me to cover.